Hello, everybody. This is Jimmy Tingle. Welcome back to Meet the Candidate series. We have right now Mr. Christopher Lim. Chris Lim, second-time candidate for school committee. He is a parent, spouse to a teacher, engineer by training, and area coach for soccer and baseball. Looking for ways to leverage our tremendous regional talent and resources to benefit the kids and improve or create systems to analyze and inform committee decision making. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the Meet the Candidate series, the one, the only Mr. Christopher Lim. Hello, Christopher.
Hello, Jimmy. Thanks again for doing this.
Of course. How are you?
I'm doing really well.
Good. How's the campaign trail treating you?
You never really know in Cambridge. You just keep going out and trying to meet people and talking about issues with engaged voters and, let the chips fall where they may.
Right. Well, thank you again for being engaged enough and concerned enough to run for office a second time. Tell me, why are you running again for Cambridge School Committee?
I'm just crazy enough to try it again. 2 years ago when we talked, what prompted my run was the increase in behavior challenges, often verging on violent and racist in my son's classroom experience coming up through the elementary school. Sadly, in 2 years, that really hasn't changed that much, right? Like there's still pretty much outrageous classroom issues that the teachers are having to deal with. And similar to 2 years ago, there doesn't seem to be a district-wide plan. There doesn't seem to be a set of skills or tools that our teachers are equipped with, and there's no additional support when they need to deal with those issues. And then, of course,
let me just stop you there, if I may, because this is a serious issue. Can you give me an example of something that happened initially that got you interested in running and that you see as an ongoing issue in terms of the classroom?
Absolutely. Thanks, Jimmy. My kid was in second grade when, he was routinely reporting that the N-word was being bantered around by kids in his class. It was in third or fourth grade, or I think fourth grade, when a kid stood up in class and threw a chair and knocked over a table. In fifth grade, there were teacher property that was stolen or vandalized, kids jumping on the desks and screaming the N-word again. Those are moments that stick with a young mind for a long time. And so those were issues that the classroom teacher has to deal with. It obviously takes away from her ability or their ability to teach. And when it happens routinely, the kids in the class really don't feel like their education becomes the priority, right? It's classroom management. It's trying to deal with this disturbance today rather than focus on education. And these are incredibly difficult times already. When you add in a global pandemic on top of that, my family was one of the ones that was lucky enough to be okay and able to work remotely and able to support our kid. Not every family was. And what's sad is in some ways, my kid felt like his own education benefited from being remote because there were less classroom disturbances.
Wow. And so when you would report these, your contention is that it doesn't go up the chain of command high enough, or there is no follow through, or
I think sort of all of the above. I think we are incentivizing school principals to not tell the district because they feel like their reputation or their support wanes if they report too many problems to the district. And so they try and deal with it in-house, but their resources are limited. And these disturbances happened fairly regularly and often enough that it really didn't feel like the classroom teachers felt supported. And again, what we had seen, when my kid was younger, was that sometimes the same children would have the same issues and then they would vanish. They'd be transferred to another school or it just had this aura of the problem being swept under the rug rather than addressed and dealt with. And for a district that prides itself on, so many progressive values, that just seemed like it missed the point.
Hmm. Well, as I'm sure you're aware, this is not unique to Cambridge or the Cambridge class. It probably, from what I've heard, it goes on most places. Would you agree?
It does, but my wife is a teacher in Belmont, right? And
Hmm.
Belmont has a quarter of the resources that Cambridge does,
Hmm.
a really huge public school system with very little industry to support it. And yet they see a different side of these problems. And when the problems come up, they confront them head on, and there's a sense of personal accountability, not only for the students, but also for the families. And so there's something missing in how we handle this, where I think that we've made some good strides in dealing with some things and allowing there to be a reconciliation process. But on the other hand, it feels like sometimes we're allowing for personal accountability to sort of just fade away as a concept.
Hmm. So, as a school committee person, if you were elected, one of the things you would advocate for to alter that scenario would be what?
I think we need transparency. I think the schools need to be able to have an open communication with the district and the superintendent, so that when there's an issue, they don't feel like they're going to get in more trouble if they have more than a certain number of incidents. I feel like the district needs to do some top-down coordination and management of these challenges. We need additional resources, whether it's social workers, child psychologists, special ed. We need people that can go into the classroom and work and develop a long-term relationship with these children, the ones that are in crisis and in most in need, and in effect act as a buffer for the classroom teacher, so that the classroom teacher can focus on education.
Okay, great. So let's move on to the other issues, that the other reasons that you're running for. Thank you for that, Christopher, because that's a really important and an insightful part of the curriculum or the school system that not everybody has talked about. Nobody else has raised.
Thank you very much for the chance. In a lot of ways, those type of problems are where I see the challenges that CPS faces and what I could do to help. I think a lot of times we are stuck in the same mode of doing business. We penalize communication. We don't encourage transparency in the process, and we create situations where our teachers, our staff, our administration, they all kind of feel isolated and they're trying to do everything themselves rather than embrace the fact that we are resource rich in Cambridge. We should be able to come up with policy, analyze that policy impact, talk with the people that are most impacted by that policy change, and then revisit that policy. But we don't do any of it. And this continues to motivate me to run. We are dealing with a global pandemic with all of the changes and all of the challenges that implies. And yet here we are at the start of another school year, and it really doesn't feel that different, right? Like we're entering a fall in New England, with the winter, fast approaching, and it doesn't feel like we've taken advantage of the 18 months of experience dealing with this pandemic. We don't have great resources set up. We don't when I asked at my kids' school if there were plans for additional outdoor space, which we know became, sort of a premium issue if we have a COVID breakthrough, or we have, additional requirements due to isolation that we need to set up. We don't have any of those plans in place. And that was shocking to me. We should have used this, last 18 months to really prepare for not only the likelihood of COVID or a variant, but also just preparing for the next problem, right? Like we need better long-term planning in Cambridge, particularly dealing with the schools. We are purposely growing our population. We're increasing the density in Cambridge. And we kind of assume that these people are not going to come in with families or have families while they're here. And we don't have the sites allocated. We don't have additional funding set aside for, developing more schools. We haven't done anything really to enhance our chances for universal pre-K. And I sit there and I wonder why we didn't make those plans when we were confronted with a global pandemic, and we don't seem to have put any thought into what happens next.
Right. Well, I'll say this in defense of the school committee. From the people I talked to, nobody saw this thing coming. And all of a sudden, boom, we're in a pandemic, and we had to, I mean, and I'll just, from what I've gathered with these interviews, they had to adjust and, kind of reinvent the wheel on a certain level. So I think that probably had something to do with it. But your points are well taken. We're at the closing statement portion right now. But please, Christopher, if elected, what would you like to do? How can people find you if they want to get involved in your campaign, make a large campaign contribution? That's always good, right?
Always appreciated. The website is very simple, limforcambridge.com. It has all of my contact information, some rough talking points, and you can certainly leave your voter contact information, and I will respond by email or phone as requested. Just to touch briefly on that point, Jimmy, the people that were impacted were the teachers and the administrators dealing with it on a day-to-day basis, right? The school committee is this sort of odd extracurricular extremity that needs to be looking at these long-range plans, right? Like, school committee didn't necessarily have a large hand in what was going on a day-to-day basis in the schools, and we needed them to. They needed to roll up their sleeves and dive into that challenge. And to your point, yes, nobody saw exactly COVID happening, but doesn't that beg the question, why? We run one of the best funded public school systems in the United States. Why don't we have a disaster response plan? Why don't we have a thoughtful plan for the next decade or 2 decades of population growth that we're expecting? Why don't we have a system in place that checks on school committee policy, verifies that it was implemented correctly, talks with the teachers and administrators who are dealing with the consequences, and then comes back to the school committee in general and addresses what happened?
Great. Well, thank you so much, Christopher. We really appreciate you taking time out to speak with us today, and congratulations on running again. We wish you the best. We will see you on the campaign trail. And where can people find you one more time?
limforcambridge.com. I need your #1 vote on November 2nd. Thank you.
All right, Chris. Thank you so much.